Drive to Survive made Formula One louder, flashier, and more popular than ever, but also the most scripted it's ever felt. The rivalries look real, the drama looks raw, but behind the edits, the racing is getting lost. Even the drivers are calling it out because what's unfolding on screen isn't always what happened on track. And now, fans are asking the question no one expected: is Drive to Survive ruining the sport it was meant to save? You know, a few years ago, Formula One was still a mystery to most people. Fast cars, foreign circuits, and names you only heard during Sunday reruns. It was a sport for diehards, not casual viewers. You needed to understand strategy, tire wear, and qualifying formats just to follow what was going on. And then came Drive to Survive, a Netflix documentary series, and everything changed. Netflix didn't just film races, they built characters. They turned team bosses into rival generals and drivers into stars of a global drama. Suddenly, it wasn't about who led the championship. It was about who stormed out of the paddock, who snapped on the radio, and who looked the most furious behind the helmet. And believe me, it worked. By 2022, Formula One's US viewership jumped by over 40%. Race attendance broke records, with 440,000 people showing up at the Austin GP alone, and fan engagement on social media exploded. People weren't just watching races, they were invested in personalities, feuds, and story arcs. Drive to Survive didn't just popularize F1, it redefined how the world experienced it. But when the storytelling becomes the product, the racing starts to fade into the background. And Max Verstappen skipped the show entirely for 3 seasons, calling it fake drama and overhyped nonsense. And he wasn't alone. Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, even team principals have pushed back on how their words were twisted to fit a script. Because let's be real, showing a well-executed tire strategy doesn't go viral. 2 drivers shouting in a garage might not define the race, but it guarantees the clicks. And that's what matters now. And Netflix knew exactly what they were doing. Fans spotted mismatched footage, audio that didn't belong, timelines rearranged for tension. What started as a docu-series slowly became a high-gloss reality show with pit crews. Here's where it gets messy, because Drive to Survive didn't just bring in more fans, it split the F1 community right down the middle. On one side, you've got the Netflix generation, young, loud, and all in on the drama. And on the other, the old school crowd, the ones who've been watching since before DRS was even a thing. And now, they're barely speaking the same language. You know, the stats don't lie. Between 2020 and 2022, US Formula One fandom jumped by 33%, and over half of new fans said they started watching F1 because of Drive to Survive. That's not growth, that's a cultural takeover. But here's the problem. 26% of those Netflix viewers admit they don't even watch the actual races. They're here for the characters, not the corners. And if you've ever scrolled through F1 Twitter during a Grand Prix, you've seen the divide play out in real time. While some fans are analyzing tire degradation and undercuts, others are arguing over who won the episode. It's no longer just about performance on track, it's about who gets the most screen time. You can always tell when something stops being spontaneous and starts being performed. That's exactly what happened when Drive to Survive became part of the F1 garage. Drivers began watching their own reactions. Team bosses started timing their outbursts. Everyone knew the cameras were there, and more importantly, they knew which moments would make the final cut. Toto Wolff and Christian Horner, brilliant strategists, yes, but also 2 of the most media-savvy figures in the sport. Their rivalry plays like a scripted power struggle now, with perfectly placed jabs and walkouts that feel made for TV. And it works, because Netflix eats it up. That tension doesn't just fuel the rivalry, it drives the views, shapes the narrative, and steals the spotlight. But what does it do to the sport? When drivers admit they're more careful about what they say on the radio, not for the FIA, but for Netflix, you know the focus has shifted. This isn't about racecraft anymore. It's about narrative control. Every pit wall reaction, every team order, every helmet slam is part of a bigger storyline. But not everyone benefits from this new spotlight. In the world of Drive to Survive, it's not your position on the grid that matters. It's your position in the script. Let's be honest, Drive to Survive doesn't reward talent. It rewards screen time. And in this new reality, some drivers are being elevated, while others are being completely erased. Take Nyck de Vries. The guy was a Formula E world champion, had barely a handful of F1 races under his belt, and Netflix already decided he was a flop. In Season 6, he got around 20 minutes of airtime before being cut out of the narrative entirely. No story, no nuance, just a highlight reel of downfall, edited before his season even started. Meanwhile, Daniel Ricciardo's return was treated like a cinematic event. His comeback wasn't measured by lap times. It was scripted with music, moments, and just enough drama to steal the spotlight. And it's not just Nyck. Drivers like Bottas and Perez, both proven, consistent, and podium-worthy, get reduced to background noise. Why? Because they don't explode on the radio or storm out of the garage. Their racing isn't loud enough for Netflix to care. And here's where it gets dangerous. The drivers getting cut from Netflix are also losing exposure, sponsors, leverage. In a sport this expensive, losing the edit can mean losing your seat. So ask yourself, if Netflix is deciding who stays relevant in Formula One, who's actually running the grid? And believe me, things stop being just dramatic and start getting dangerous. Because all that screen time, it's not just about fame, it's about money. Drive to Survive didn't just boost viewership, it completely reshaped F1's business model. Since the show launched, Formula One's global fan base has grown to over 500 million, and sponsorship revenue jumped by nearly 23% between 2021 and 2022 alone. Teams that barely made headlines before are now securing multi-million-dollar deals, not because of points on the board, but because of how often they're featured on Netflix. But here's the trade-off. The more F1 leans into entertainment, the further it drifts from the purity of competition. Race strategy barely makes it into episodes. Stewards' decisions, track limits, even mid-race penalties, all skipped or softened to keep the story moving. And what the show doesn't explain, the fans never learn. Even the FIA had to step in. In 2023, they privately raised concerns that Drive to Survive was misrepresenting regulations and creating confusion among new viewers. And they're not wrong, because when drama replaces detail, the audience might grow, but the understanding gets lost. This is the cost of turning sport into spectacle. The show keeps the spotlight hot, but it dims the discipline. And if that balance keeps tipping, Formula One risks becoming less of a championship and more of a season-long performance. You know, even Stefano Domenicali, the CEO of F1, admitted they've had to warn Netflix to be more accurate and avoid twisting storylines. That's not a PR statement, that's damage control. Because when the head of the sport is stepping in to fact-check the show that made it global, something's clearly off. Sure, Max Verstappen is back on the show, but only after demanding strict content control over how he's portrayed. That's not a comeback, that's a contract clause, and it speaks volumes about how much trust has been broken behind the scenes. Meanwhile, other platforms, Apple TV, Disney+, are already working on their own F1 content. Formula One isn't just racing anymore, it's becoming a content factory, where every moment is repackaged, replayed, and resold from every possible angle. So, is Drive to Survive actually ruining Formula One? If you only look at the numbers, the answer seems obvious. Record crowds, soaring viewership, sponsorship deals pouring in. But numbers don't tell you what's been lost. Because behind the surge is a sport that doesn't feel the same. The tension feels edited, the rivalries feel rehearsed, and the purity, the raw, relentless battle that once defined Formula One is slipping away. Drive to Survive didn't destroy F1 overnight. It did something worse. It rewrote the soul of the sport in slow motion until the drama looked more real than the racing. This sport was built on precision, pressure, and raw competition, on men and machines pushed to the limit, not characters edited for tension. Drive to Survive didn't ruin the rules. It rewrote the emotions. It made us feel something, sure. But in doing so, it blurred the line between racing and performance. When rivalries are scripted, reactions are staged, and races are trimmed down to a narrative arc, that's not F1 anymore. So yes, Drive to Survive made the sport louder, shinier, and more dramatic. But in chasing the drama, it chipped away at the essence. And if Formula One keeps leaning into the entertainment, at the cost of the sport, then we won't have to ask if it's being ruined. We'll already be watching the proof, one season at a time. If Drive to Survive is rewriting the sport, then it's up to us to call it out. Subscribe now, because the real F1 deserves a voice that isn't scripted.